Right. What I want to do is just, well, I'll just say one thing because I feel more comfortable when I say it, is that I never planned to write any of these books. I never planned to do anything like this. Never planned to be speaking to a lot of people. It's kind of like, I've said this before, it's like walking down a street and a parade is formed behind me. It's kind of uncomfortable to me in a way. And I just like to say that I'm sure each of you could be up here talking about something. It just happens that you've come to hear me talk about this. But I think I like us to feel kind of equal and connected rather than me parading around like the big deal here. Anyway, because now I'm going to do that. now I'm going to give you a lot of information, some of which you may have heard before, but it'll be a little different, and also you all need it again and again and again. And it actually has changed a lot from when I wrote the book. And not the trait at all, but the way that I talk about it and think about it. And in the book I said this, but it's much clearer now that this trait is found in a minority of people, but a substantial minority, about 20%. And it's found in at least 100 species besides humans. And so we now know, and this is new, this idea of personalities within a species, that there could be two types rather than just one ideal. We used to think in evolution that everything is sort of merging towards the perfect animal in that particular environment. But now we know that there often are two types that are there. One is more numerous than the other, always. And the two strategies, one is to be very responsive and pay careful attention to everything that's going on, and the other is not to bother. And you might say, well, of course it's better to pay attention, but it isn't always, because sometimes there's nothing really that you can learn from this situation that applies to the next situation. And then you've wasted your energy, basically. And we all know, as sensitive people, that there is energy that is taken up by being so observant and processing everything so deeply. So there are advantages to both strategies. It depends on the situation. But the man who did the nice computer simulation of how this would evolve in all different species, Max Wolf, he's in Germany, and he just did this on his own, and we found each other, but he was not thinking about my book. He was thinking about animals. And in fact, the animal people are very interested in us as another species, because here the species has this then that seems that it's possible that all these other species would really have what they're looking at too. And you can't talk to the monkeys and the fruit flies and the pumpkin seed sunfish and all these different species that's been found in, but we can talk to humans. But so his point is that if everybody were highly sensitive, then there would be no value in it. So his example is if there's a patch of grass that's especially nutritious and all the cows go to that patch of grass and eat it, then there's no benefit for anybody. But if only some of the cows notice that there's a patch of grass that's particularly tasty, then they get the benefit of it and the others don't. But if there's no special patch, then it doesn't matter. The example I like is that if there's a traffic jam, because this is me, I always know all the shortcuts. I know routes through town that nobody else knows. But if everybody knows them, then they're not shortcuts anymore. So you're not going to hear about mine. I live in Marin anyway, so. So like one early example that I like is of pumpkin seed sunfish. And a person who's become a friend of mine, David Wilson, did this study. And so they had a pond, and they had all these pumpkin seed sunfish, and they put traps in the pond, and some of the fish went into the traps, and some did not. So they called, this is the problem with naming a trait, and they called the ones that went into the trap the bold sunfish, and the others the timid sunfish. Well, I teased him, why didn't you call them the stupid and the smart sunfish? But timid has stuck, unfortunately, in the animal world, but Max Wolf is pushing for responsiveness, because that's what he thinks the trait is. And responsiveness is a good term, so maybe we'll end up being highly responsive people. The term, the name doesn't really matter, except that people have said to me, well, how could you have discovered a new trait. I said I did not discover a new trait. The only thing that changed was I happened to be on the inside. As a psychologist, somebody said to me, well, you're highly sensitive. And I thought, what is that? I had never thought about myself that way or ever had the term. But I began to think about it, and then I interviewed other people. And you can't, one thing I learned in Bamberg, Germany, teaching these university business students, was they couldn't figure out how they were going to know if someone was highly sensitive if they didn't take the self-test. Well, why is that? Because sensitive people are not that visible. We tend to adapt most of the time. People who live with us know that we're highly sensitive. Yes. But we can often hide it in other places, or we choose environments where it's not a problem for us. So this invisibility factors made it very hard for people to discover this trait without really getting inside the minds of sensitive people. We've done that now with magnetic resonance imaging studies, which I will tell you about. So now we've got the picture. But before that, we're talking about inhibitedness. A lot of people thought it was the same as introversion, but just to reassure the extroverts in the audience, it's not the same as introversion. About 70% of highly sensitive people are introverts, but a healthy 30% are extroverts. So that's an important thing to know. There were times when people said that it was like neuroticism, but it's not neuroticism, which is a tendency towards anxiety or depression. And sensitive people who've had a difficult childhood are more likely to be anxious and depressed. But if you haven't had a difficult childhood, the new research is that you're less likely to be anxious or depressed than other people. So that's one of the exciting things that's also happening, and that is the publication of an article called Vantage Sensitivity, which is published in a really good scientific journal, and I'll describe that more to you. Getting back to one more animal example, there was quite a while ago a man named Sumi who, I think it was in 1995 that he was doing this research to begin with. He was studying rhesus monkeys who, turns out there are some that he called uptight and some that are laid back. And the uptight ones, you can figure out who they were. They were more easily stressed out. But he wanted to see what would happen if you cross-fostered them and gave them to very skilled mothers or just ordinary mothers at birth. So as soon as he figured out which kind they were, he would give them to a different type of mother. Well, it turned out that the uptight monkeys, and I don't think he calls them that anymore, became the leaders of the troops when they were raised by skilled mothers. So this is the whole picture that's emerging, is that sensitive people have tremendous advantages. And so that's why it's a joy to be highly sensitive. It was kind of masked, and I wasn't seeing it. I did my research showing that people with a troubled child, sensitive people with a troubled child, had more anxiety and depression, but without it, they were no more likely than non-sensitive people to be depressed or anxious. But it never occurred to me to look at the positive end of the scale, because I was just hoping to demonstrate we weren't any worse off than other people. And I don't want it to go in the direction of us being superior, and that's actually an anxiety that I'm beginning to have. I don't want people to feel superior. That's why I like Janine Ramsey's 4 types, because each has its value in a company, each has its value in the world. And although evolutionary people do not like to talk about survival of groups, they only like to talk about survival of individuals, I'm sure that the human race and families and all kinds of social groups have benefited from the combination of a sensitive and non-sensitive people in their midst. And I don't want to keep digressing, but a man named Jay Belsky, Michael Plewis and Jay Belsky, came up with this whole idea of differential susceptibility, looking at our research and a lot of other research on genetics and infants who are difficult or negative, all these different studies in which they found that with a good environment they did better than others. So they were very interested in that outcome. And Jay Belsky actually has a theory that he's at the University of California at Davis. He has a theory that in every family, it's an advantage to have one highly sensitive child and one not sensitive child, so that if one survives, if the environment is best for one, then it'll survive or thrive, even if the other doesn't, which is a very interesting theory. I've kind of teased him about, okay, so how does the mother's womb know what kind of baby she had first? He says, I don't care about mechanisms, it's true. So we'll see. So the way I've been talking about sensitivity lately, and it came out of my writing my book on psychotherapy in the highly sensitive person, which is, if anybody's a therapist or anybody has a therapist, slip them the book, because therapists have been kind of slow to understand about this. So I came up with an acronym, which DOES, which you can think of as DOES if you're a woman or DOES if you're a man. I don't care. It just happened to work out. DOES worked very well. And the first one is depth of processing. And this is the fundamental thing about us, is that we process information more deeply than others. And everything else kind of flows out of that. And we know this, kind of, it's obvious in the Max Wolf's ideas and my interviews and the questionnaire, but we've been able to do what are called fMRIs, functional magnetic resonance imaging, so that you have somebody in the MRI machine and they're doing something. And so one of the studies we've done is shown people pictures that are only slightly different, and we find that the sensitive people's brain activation in particular areas that have to do with deeper processing or more elaborate processing, those are the areas that are being activated. So that's an example of another one that I really like is a cultural study where they know that people in different cultures look at things differently. And actually, if you just have a box with a line in it, different size boxes, different size lines, people who come from a collectivist culture, like in Asia, they have trouble seeing the difference in the size of the lines, but they can see the difference in the size of the boxes. People who come from U.S. and from more individualistic cultures can figure out the difference between the lines, but not the boxes. I know it sounds crazy, but they had already demonstrated this, and in fact, they had demonstrated this in an fMRI. My husband was in on this research, so he slipped in the HSP scale to all the people in the study. It turned out for the highly sensitive people, their culture did not affect their ability to see these differences. In other words, their culture just wasn't affecting them. So that's another example of how we're processing things more deeply. And I think it's quite fascinating to think we don't even usually use the full scale. We just take like 10 items from it. And you only use like 8 subjects in an MRI study, like 5 in each group or 10 in each group or something like that. You don't use a lot of subjects. We still get significant differences in the brain, the way the brain is operating. So depth of processing. The second one you're all familiar with, O, is for easily overstimulated. That's the downer of the straight for sure, getting easily overstimulated, over-aroused. If there's anything that's known for sure in psychology, it's what's called the optimal level of arousal, that if you are too bored or too overstimulated, you don't function well. You function best in the middle. So, but people reach their optimal level at different rates because sensitive people are processing things more and they get overstimulated more. So that's why you've probably had the experience of taking a test or being observed or practicing and then going to perform and you don't do well, and it's so frustrating because you know you're good, but you can't show it to anybody else because you got over-aroused. And it's a huge problem for us, I'll admit. It's also what makes a lot of us shy, is because you can think of brilliant things to say when you're at home, but then you go out and you're at a party, and there's all this stimulation, and you can't think, and you can't think of anything to say, and then you feel people think you're dumb, and you don't want to go again, and then it gets worse and worse. So, okay. So the third one is E, for being emotionally reactive or responsive. and also for empathy. And this is, again, we've been able to, I mean, when I wrote the book, I didn't want to talk a lot about emotion, us being very emotional, because I thought it'd make us kind of sound neurotic or something. But I knew we were. We cry easily. The only reason cries easily is not on the test is because men don't answer yes to that as much as women do. I don't think I ever said this, by the way, but there are just as many men as women born highly sensitive. Absolutely no doubt about that. It's just a lot harder for men, and it's and in some cultures they hide it pretty completely, but not in this area. Good. So this emotional reactivity, I found this lovely article on someone rethinking cognition and emotion, which they said, cognition, thinking, is impossible without emotion, because you won't think about anything for any amount of time at all unless you are interested in it for some reason. And furthermore, if you have an experience and you need to learn from it, you'll learn from it only as much as you think about it afterwards, and you'll think about it afterwards only as much as you cared about what happened. So it's quite brilliant, isn't it? So then this makes sense that we have to have stronger emotional reactions in order to process things more. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. So they're absolutely linked like that. So back to the MRI machine, we have found that so we've done 2 studies, one in which people were looking at pictures that are supposed to create emotions, like snails and snakes and spiders and puppy dogs and birthday cakes, and things are supposed to create different emotions. Well, it turns out that sensitive people are responding more quickly and with more activation to these emotional kinds of pictures. Interesting thing was we found that actually they responded more to the positive than to the negative pictures, which then starts to explain this vantage sensitivity phenomenon, because if sensitive people are picking up on both positive and negative, but everybody picks up on negative, because we wouldn't survive if we didn't notice what we were afraid of and what made us sad, but that some people are paying more attention to the positive, it just really indicates this greater in responsiveness. Another study that was done was having people look at their, my husband studies romantic love, and so this one was of people being in the scanner, looking at pictures of their beloved or of a stranger, and either a happy, sad, or neutral expression. And sensitive people looking at anyone with a happy or a sad expression compared to neutral showed more activation, but especially when their partner was showing a happy expression. That was the strongest result. But the most interesting thing was where they found the activation. And there's something that was discovered only about 20 years ago called mirror neurons. I don't know if you've heard of mirror neurons, but some of you have been in school recently. Mirror neurons are a part of the brain that they first discovered in monkeys, where if someone kicks a ball, your brain fires as if you had kicked the ball. And if someone says kick, that same neuron fires. If you hear a ball being kicked, that neuron fires. Now, fortunately, there's another part of the brain that says, that was not you, that was somebody else. But these mirror neurons are what give us empathy, what allows us to read people's minds and to predict what people are going to do. It allows us to trick people, among other things. I mean, empathy is useful for many things. But among other things, it's good for making people feel better. And sensitive people have more empathy, and they have more activation in the mirror neurons. So, I was teaching a course at Kripalu in the spring, and somebody said, I'm so tired of picking up on what everybody else is feeling. It's like I can't separate my feelings from other people's feelings. And I hear this a lot, and so I said, well, how many in the room feel this way? And there were, by the way, 80 people. That was not what we planned, but there were 80 people for this weekend of highly sensitive people, but they didn't notice that they were filling up. So At any rate, I asked every person in the room, as far as I could tell, put their hand up that they all feel other people's feelings, and they're all moaning about it. And I said, well, these are your mirror neurons. This is what allows you to read people's minds, to know what's going on, what people are going to do, to be helpful to them. Two, if you want to be sneaky, I mean, you don't realize that you have this except when it's inconvenient, but it's a powerful tool. The other thing, and this is really strange, is that there's a part of the brain that has been termed the seat of consciousness, because it integrates all the everything that's going on in the moment, like where I'm standing, what I'm seeing, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, all the stimuli around. It all goes into a place called the insula, a little place in the brain called the insula. It turns out that sensitive people have more activation in their insula. We hadn't even looked there before, but we saw it in this study, and it turns out to be there in other studies too. So we could just be so nasty as to say that we're simply more aware than other people. We're not going to go out talking like that, but I do think it's good first to raise our self-esteem and then level it out a little bit, okay? So there's special things that are going on in our brains. And the last of these DOES is being aware of subtle stimuli. And because my husband does MRI studies, he looks at where love is in the brain. We haven't done very many behavioral studies. If anybody's a graduate student in psychology or thinking they'd like to become one, please see me, because we need more research done. But at any rate, in this study, okay, where'd I go? I just went somewhere. Where was I? Oh, subtle stimuli, yes. So there aren't very many of these simple behavioral studies, but this one is done by a man named Gerstenberg in Germany. And he simply had people looking at a screen where there were L's and T's in among other shaped things that could have been taken for L's and T's but were not. And you have to identify the L's and T's upside down and sideways and everything from the other things. And this is a standard kind of test of reaction time and ability to observe details. Sensitive people did much better than the non-sensitive people on this. Interestingly, they were also more stressed afterwards than the other people were. So there you go again. It's a trade-off. But this, and of course, the brain studies too have been showing this sensitivity to subtle stimuli, which in all the brain studies we get this deeper processing in these parts of the brain that have to do with the visual association areas, secondary visual areas, visual motor coordination areas. They're fancier terms than that. I'm not even going to bother with those. So that's most of the research. I haven't talked yet about the genetics, and I'll do that briefly. People have said, well, how do you know this was innate? And I said, well, because I just know. And other people had said this, and then there were the animal things. I have a problem with research in that I tend to think I know, and I don't want to go through the steps of doing the research because I feel I already know. And I do generally know, but we still have to do the research. So that's taken a long time to get this done. But there are some genes that have to do with serotonin. And you all know about serotonin, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors that squash depression. So serotonin was always thought to probably be related to depression and anxiety. And in fact, there are 3 alleles. Alleles are the things that decide, say, whether you're going to have blue eyes or brown eyes. So they're normal, but they're different. So there are 3 alleles for serotonin. One is the short, one is the short-long, and one is the long. And if you have the short, you're more prone to depression. But every time they'd go and do a study and look at all the people with short alleles, they found that they weren't all depressed. So you know, for a long time they could not figure this out. Finally, they got it that if you had a troubled childhood or stressful life, and you had the short allele, then you were going to be depressed. But if you hadn't had any of that happen, the short allele wasn't a problem. Then a few people got really clever and thought, well, what is it there for that about 20% of people have this? Well, they found out that people with the short allele process information more carefully. They make better decisions in gambling experiments in the laboratory, where they just have people making decisions and based on how much money they're going to win and lose. So it's like sensitive people are more careful when they're going to lose money and more audacious when they think they're going to win money. And the more money, the more bold they get, but also more cautious they get. My family used to drag me to the racetrack because I loved horses, and I could look at them and figure out which one was going to win. But I hated the betting because I didn't want to lose. It was never a lucrative enterprise. So the other genetic study was a nice surprise for me. So we found that sensitive people who score high on the scale are more likely to have the short and the short-long allele. It is not the only story, however. Off in China, I did not know this was going to happen. Then I suddenly, the article shows up that these group of scholars in China had observed that the personality measures that we have, one of the most popular being the Big Five. I don't know if you've heard of the Big Five, but it's introversion, extroversion, neuroticism, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and open-mindedness. And these have been very popular for quite a while. And there are other personality tests like the Myers-Briggs. But when you give those to people, we know that personality is highly inherited from twin studies. And identical twins are more likely to have a similar personality than fraternal twins. And twins raised apart, twice twins raised together, and all this stuff. But when you actually give the test and you look at the genes, there isn't very much correlation between the tests and the genes. So maybe they were looking at the wrong traits. So this Chinese team discovered high sensitivity, and they said, oh, this sounds like it's deeply rooted in the physiology. So they used it, and then they just looked at all the dopamine genes. In China, people are not as interested in serotonin as they are in dopamine, I think partly because there's more of this short allele in Asian countries. At any rate, they looked at dopamine, and there are 78 dopamine alleles, but they found that 10 of them were highly related to the HSP scale at the kind of level that you would predict from what's known about personality and genetics. So there are some dopamine genes also involved, and I think there's going to be a lot of genes because there are hundreds of genes that govern personality, and we don't know much about them. In fact, the dopamine genes they found were not ones, for the most part, that anyone knew had anything to do with personality. So we're still discovering all kinds of things. So I think I've worn you out on research, although I could tell you more. One more favorite story. Since we're talking about the short allele, two. Well, one is that they found that rhesus monkeys is the only other species that has this allele, and that rhesus monkeys with the short allele, they just have short and long, are the same, the uptight ones. But also, when they have this, they are superior cognitive performance, a wide range of, I can't remember quite the phrase, a broad range of superior cognitive performance, something like that, for rhesus monkeys too. This is very interesting to me. And this guy said, maybe the adaptability of rhesus monkeys, because they can live almost anywhere on Earth, and human beings, is because we have these two alleles that allow the more responsive ones to figure out how to adapt and the others imitate it. It's an interesting idea. The Michael Pluis, who is a Swiss guy, and I think I dare say highly sensitive, one of the things that's happening is like people who are very talented and doing very well in the world are starting to say they're highly sensitive when before they weren't. And in fact, they didn't even realize they were until like Michael got involved in this differential susceptibility research. He did, okay, I'm going to tell you two more studies. One with the HSP scale that he did. There was an intervention being done to teach young teenage girls to be more resilient so that when they were older, they would not get depressed, because teenage girls tend to get depressed in their teens. So they did this program, and they watched the girls, and it gave them all the HSP scale, too, at the beginning. Turned out that only those who scored in the upper third of the HSP scale got anything from the program. The others didn't get anything from it. So now Jay Belsky, who is kind of the bad boy in psychology, is going around saying that all the interventions we've been doing all these years to help people have only been working on sensitive people. And we either got to change the interventions or save our money and just use them on sensitive people. So, I mean, that's what I mean by the whole energy is changing. An SS allele study that's really interesting is, you know, these Romanian orphans, there's still too many of them, and so they put some in orphanages, and they have a random lottery as to which ones will get put into foster care homes that are very skilled, that can take care of these kids that have already been in orphanages for a while. So they put them into foster care, they leave them in the orphanage where they've been for a while. Turns out only the children with the short alleles get any benefit from being in foster care. The others don't. At 54 months, the ones with the short alleles have changed their social behavior, and the others haven't. So, I mean, one of the good things is that for people who've had a difficult childhood, which used to feel like if you're highly sensitive, you had a difficult childhood, bye-bye, you're just going to be depressed and anxious your whole life. No, actually, it looks as though we're especially responsive to therapy and self-help books and the various things that we all try to do to get our act together. So it seems like sensitive people get more from that. I want to just talk about what I say to be 4, and actually I'll say 5 things that are very important for every highly sensitive person. And the first one is that you should appreciate this trait, that you should know that it's real. Know that it's real, because you're among 80% of the population who don't think it's real, don't have it. We all think other people are going to be like ourselves. At the University of Hamburg, the non-sensitive students were saying, well, how am I supposed to know if someone's highly sensitive? And I really wasn't sure what to tell them. And one of them said, especially because I'm not highly sensitive. So I don't notice the difference between people. So you're going to have to get it yourself, that this is real. And look around the room. Look at all the people who came. This is real. My website, this month there's 36,000 people who are subscribing. They don't read what I write, but they click about 4,000 click through, and I'm sure that none of them finish, but they get it and they haven't unsubscribed yet. So the sales of the books, the other animals with this trait, just get it that it's real. The second thing that you have to do is then when you get it that it's real, you have to change your lifestyle. If you haven't yet, get going, because you're going to have to do it. You're different, and that means that you just can't live the same as other people. You have to keep the stress level down, the stimulation down. You have to make use of your trait and not be operating against it. So, you know, downtime, and just preach the old sermon again. I'm up here, so I guess I can preach a sermon. You gotta take downtime. Every day you need, ideally, a couple hours where you can just let your mind float. I recommend meditation, but sweeping the floor is fine. Going for a walk, but don't have things in your ears and don't have anyone talking to you. Just you need time by yourself. That gives you time to process all this stuff that has come in. It's like trying to digest stuff. And when you do that, you'll actually get good ideas. So it's like doing less and accomplishing more. terms of your work life. If you take time off from your work, you'll actually have much better ideas. It's very true for everyone, but more so for sensitive people. So don't plan every minute of your life unless you're going to plan in downtime. And be sure to get enough time in bed. Even if you have trouble not sleeping because you're overstimulated, when you get overstimulated, you're not going to be able to sleep. That's a real curse for sensitive people too. But stay in bed for 8 hours. And if you keep your eyes closed, it's 80% of your stimulation comes in through your eyes, so you're still getting good rest if you'll just spend that time in bed. And I know some of the sleep people say, get up and read or something if you're not sleeping, but I'm not sure that's the best thing for sensitive people. And I think people should take a day off a week if they can. The parents, of course, are accepted from this, but my husband and I have always tried to keep a sort of a Sabbath, a day when we don't do any work and we get everything done. We don't run errands, we don't do anything but sleep late and do something we feel like doing. But sleeping late should be the first priority. And I think vacations are better off spaced through the year, like a week every quarter rather than one big vacation. But whatever you do, don't plan your whole vacation in terms of activity. If you're going to have an active vacation, then you should also have another vacation for resting, where sleep is the highest priority, and maybe you go someplace you've been to every year, or you stay home and just take it easy. You need to just cut down on the stimulation that's not necessary. You know, there's stuff, I don't know if you've noticed how much there is to read all the time. I mean, everyone's competing for our attention all the time. So you have to keep your eyes off of that stuff if you can, because it's, I was at the grocery store, and you know those little things that they put between your bunch of stuff and the next person's bunch? Well, in one grocery store, they had advertisements all over it. There's advertisements in magazines and everything all around me, and I just realized, gee, you know, my eyes are being invited to process. So try not to pay attention to that stuff. And say no. Say no to things that you don't have to do. Nobody knows but you if you're tired. Nobody knows but you if you're at your limit. Nobody else can see it, especially because we're so adaptive and we're so nice and we're so aware of what other people need and what other people are feeling. But you have to say no. So that's another thing that sensitive people often have trouble with. When you are experiencing a lot of high stimulation, you should take breaks. Take breaks before you're exhausted. So, you know, take a break. Take care of your hunger. One of the items on the self-test is that being hungry affects us more. It does affect us more. I don't know why exactly, but be sure to eat, you know, meals at a regular time, and lean on your friends who understand your sensitivity, because, you know, first of all, we can talk about relationships when we take questions if you want, but it's just very important that the people around you that you're closest to understand your sensitivity, either because they are highly sensitive or that they're not, but they get it, and that they get it, that all the positive things as well as the problem things, and then they help you with the problems because they want the benefit of the positive things. And, you know, I can see some people have really bright light in their eyes. Feel free to change seats, because it's kind of, I know it shifts, but at times it's really bright. So feel free to go sit over there. It's all right. You can sit here. Because it looks really uncomfortable. See, it's making me uncomfortable. So social support can protect you from the effects of overstimulation. You know, just two people together are often less anxious and overstimulated than one person. So if you just do something with another person, but also people can protect you. My husband is not here this time, but he usually comes to every place where I speak. And he has a deal where he comes at a certain minute. We've agreed on the time, and he comes and says, it's time to leave, and it doesn't matter how many people are talking to me, he starts yanking me out the door, and that's how he protects me. But I think the thing that is more important that we haven't put so much attention on is taking advantage of our assets. Because if we're in the right job and the right relationship and the right environment, then we just flourish, and then the other stuff kind of takes care of itself. our philosophy tends to be to do it once and do it right. So that's great. That just means that we're likely to have things right. We tend to make good decisions, and we tend to have good intuition and be pretty creative and good at sensing what other people need. So put yourself in a place where those things are paying off for you, and get out of the places where it's not working. So I think that's most... Okay, I said two things that people need. To believe their trait is real and to change their lifestyle. The third one that I'd like to say is that you then need to go back and reframe your life in terms of your sensitivity. Go back and think about the things that really hit your self-esteem. For instance, the times when you failed, the times when you made decisions that you just had to give up this relationship, you just had to not take this job even though you really wanted it and everybody else thought it was the best thing for you, but you had to quit. I could have nationwide support groups for all the lawyers who have quit law after going through law school. Law school is a great place for sensitive people. We can study and learn all those facts and everything, but it's not a very good profession for most sensitive people. So we need to, like, okay, now I understand why I stopped being a lawyer and went through all that for, quote, nothing. We never go through anything for nothing, but it can feel that way. So just reframing your life, you can just start thinking about it, and it takes time, but it's important to do because it changes the whole way you feel about yourself. And you have to get it that you've been people have looked at you kind of and said, what's the matter with you, or why are you being that way? And so all that stuff kind of settles in, and you have to kind of throw it off. Now I know why I'm this way. Jacqueline Strickland, who runs these HSP gatherings, she's always talking about empowerment, empowering highly sensitive people. I think it's true. And then the last thing I say is that if you've had a troubled childhood, then you want to work on healing those wounds so that you're not being affected by depression and anxiety and all that so much. And that's a project. It can be a big project for many sensitive people. I know a lot of sensitive people who are wrestling with really horrific childhoods. In fact, I wrote a blog. I have a Psychology Today blog, and I wrote something called The Wound with No Name, because of the certain people among us who cannot work or cannot be in a relationship or are chronically ill with something that's highly stress-related, and when we notice them or find out, talk to them and find out from one way or another about them, I mean, nobody knows why they are that way. But if you go and ask, you will always, almost always find a story of a horrible childhood. So we don't have a name for it. We don't have any way of, it's not visible, but it's there. And I know lots of highly sensitive people deal with that. And then people say, well, everybody had a troubled childhood, or just forget about the past. But you can't do that when you're highly sensitive. It's not that easy. So that's another. The other thing that I sort of throw in as the fifth one is that you should meet other highly sensitive people, which you can chalk that off the list. You're having this experience. But to be in a room with other highly sensitive people is quite unique. And it's hard to describe, except I've discovered from my few speaking experiences with a mixed audience, I'm very uncomfortable. There's something so nice about speaking to highly sensitive people, and I suspect that you can feel it. So I used to say that it's like being in church, but I can't say that here. But it has that quality, which brings up just another point that I don't usually say much about, and that is that highly sensitive people are highly spiritual. And even if they're atheists, they're very strong about their atheism because we think about things a lot. We go deeply into thinking about things, where things came from, where things are going, why they're the way they are. In fact, in the book, I've talked about the warrior kings and the priestly advisors, and we just naturally go into that priestly advisor role of the people who are the you know, experts in science and philosophy and medicine, but also the people who have thought about spiritual things. So I like to joke that the warrior king is dying on the battlefield, and he's laying there and he's saying, how did I get here? Get my priestly advisor, who will then come and explain about life and death and mortality and God and shrive them or whatever is in that tradition. So I'm going to say something else which is depressing but important, I think. I think almost all highly sensitive people are upset about global warming. It's a topic nobody wants to bring up. And sensitive people don't want to bring it up around non-sensitive people because it upsets them. It upsets everybody. But I think it's part of some kind of a spiritual digestive processing thing for us all to chew on, and I think it'll make a difference if we chew on it. So I bring it up, and there are lots of different ways to chew on it, and of course we have to do what we can do, but just there's something happening that's very interesting and very profound in the world right now. So just the reason why I bring it up is because I don't think there's a person in the room who's not upset by it. So let's just bring it out and say that rather than having it stuffed down inside. Maybe a few people have already worked it through to some place of peace, but we need to look at the very big picture, and sometimes that's a help. And of course to know that there are lots and lots and lots and lots of people who are trying to do something about it that are not so visible. Okay, said my piece about that because I've kind of sworn that I would say something about it because I feel that it's better to face it and do something than to just deny it. This is an excellent question. What advice do you have for someone in love or in a relationship with an HSP when that someone is also sensitive but perhaps less so? And that's a good way to put it, because very often they're two sensitive people, but one is even more sensitive than the other. So I think the first thing to do, I always say, is to go ahead and grieve the things that you're not going to be able to do together because of this difference in temperament. So often I tell people when they go home and they announce to their partner, hey, I'm highly sensitive, I'm sure you'll be really glad to hear this news because now you'll understand me better, and I'm so happy to know about this, so I'm sure you're happy. And the partner very often is not too thrilled to hear this news because it means things are going to change. And now the sensitive person has an excuse to not go to the football game or not do these things that maybe they were doing before just to be nice. So you have to grieve the difference in temperament. And both sides have to grieve it, because I will tell you a little piece of research. My husband likes, like I said, he likes to study close relationships. So I brought up the subject of sensitive people getting more bored in relationships with non-sensitive people. We get bored because the conversations are not deep enough. Sensitive people, even in the most satisfying, otherwise satisfying relationships, are more easily bored by the conversations that they have. We found it's not they're more easily bored because they'd like to be riding on roller coasters. It's because that they think about the meaning of life and they want to be able to discuss it with other people. So there are these these differences that are not going to go away. It's like you have to figure out what a person can change and what a person cannot change. And there are things people can change, and it's not right to have to put up with somebody who's not sharing in the drudgery at home or something like that. That people can change. But other things they can't change. So once you have done that, then you can get creative in terms of how you're going to adapt to your differences. Like you take 2 cars to a party so that the person who's more sensitive can go home early or something like that. Also, sensitive people speak in a lower volume. And I don't mean how loud you speak, but more, instead of just asking, we tend to give hints like, doesn't it seem hot in here to you? You know? Not, would somebody please turn the air conditioning on? It's more that kind of thing. So, and they don't like, it's hard for them to have the bluntness that non-sensitive people use to get across their point to other non-sensitive people. So just little things like, why did you do that? You know, what were you thinking? Those kinds of things just, oh, you know, I already know I made a mistake, don't pound it in. But I had one sensitive person told me that she was getting her review at work, and the manager said, well, what do you want, the good news or the bad news first? I mean, that pretty much ruined her day right there. What was the bad news? That's all she could think about. What is the bad news? So turning down the volume, my poor husband, who's not highly sensitive, we cannot make a bed together or put up a tent together. Of course, that's the ultimate test of a marriage, isn't it? But because he's always giving me orders, like now we do this, now we put the pillows up, straighten up that side, do this, do that. I feel like I'm being given orders. And he says, I'm not giving you orders, I'm just telling you what we need to do next. And I said, no, I would rather do this in silence because I know how to do it, and it's like we could do it like a dance, like we'd be reading each other's minds, and it would be... He makes the bed. We don't try to do it together anymore. So turning down the volume can be hard. And also listening for hints. And sensitive people have to turn up the volume a little bit. My husband says I give him a 1 and a 2, and then I hit him with a 10, where if I could just give him a 5, then he would know what I wanted and he would do it. You know? So, okay, so those are some of the points. Let me see. Oh, yes, in the highly sensitive person love, I have the results of the first and only sexuality and temperament survey. Now you're all going to go out and buy the book. Well, I asked a lot of questions that I was personally curious about, but we found that sensitive people are very different about their sexuality, and this is an important part of a romantic sexual relationship, is to get that right. And sensitive people are more easily overstimulated. They don't like a lot of variety as much. They don't need to do it in the restroom on the airplane. They find sex more mysterious and powerful. And so there was lots of interesting things there. So just you can imagine in every area of life we have a difference in the kind of style that we use when you're sensitive and when you're not. You know, this trait is invisible, but I think it's bigger than gender in some ways. You think about the highly sensitive person scale, that questionnaire. There are people who say yes to every item, and there are people who say no to every item. Well, and we're all living in the same world. I mean, it's scary when you think about that. Like, I am not conscientious. I do not notice what other people are feeling. I do not have a rich, complex inner life. Okay. Okay, 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 okay. Are you aware of any research studies besides mine on HSPs? Yes, there are people doing studies all the time now that I don't know about. I'm willing to loan my brain in the interest of medical science. Well, unfortunately, your being here has just spoiled that, because you can't use subjects who already know what the study's about. So, too bad about that. On the other hand, if you would like to be a graduate student in psychology, sign up. Would you please discuss how HSPs tend to interact and may attract narcissists? Thank you. It's a good question. Well, there are two kinds of narcissists, I think. One is just the ones that have been spoiled or entitled and just kind of just blanket like that. And then there were the wounded narcissists who are defending themselves against a deep wound. And they have to be the best all the time, and they have to have everyone noticing them because they secretly feel very insecure. So you kind of have to sort out which kind you're dealing with, because just the entitled, spoiled ones, you can kind of knock them down a bit, or maybe you can't, but it's the other ones who tend to pull you in because they need your love and attention, and then as soon as they know they've got you, they like to exert their power and push you away. And sometimes we call this the windshield wiper relationship, because they're also often avoidance. And I talk about attachment style. Attachment style has been well studied now, very interesting subject, zillions of studies on attachment style. The first 2 years of life, the way that you connect to your first caregiver affects how you relate in intimate relationships for the rest of your life. It's possible to change it, but it's remarkably conservative how the brain views us. And there's 3 different styles. One is secure, and about 50 to 60% of people have secure attachment styles in which they think that people will love them, and they tend to like most people, and it's all really nice. Then there are 2 kinds of insecures. One is the avoidant type, and they tend to be the narcissists. They're the ones who learned early, don't count on your caregiver, act tough, look brave, be self-sufficient, but they're still tracking the caregiver, they're still tracking the partner, but they're trying to act like it doesn't matter. So this is where you get this windshield wiper relationship, because if you try to be friendly, if you show affection to them, they back away. And if you back off and say, I've had it with this person, pretty soon they're calling you and they want to see you again, so it goes like that. And that's tough, and it's not easy to be in a relationship with somebody like that. I have written another book which didn't sell very well. It's called The Undervalued Self, which goes to show people didn't want to read books about me, they wanted to read about high sensitivity. Although, for some reason, it sold 30,000 copies in Korea. I think it sold about 7,000 copies in the United States. But in it, I think it was quite a brilliant book, except for the title, which had nothing to do with. But, you know, I have the subway test. Are you going to read this book on the subway? Who's going to read The Undervalued Self on the subway? Who's going to loan this book to a friend and say, you should really read this book. It changed my life. It'll change yours. But in it, I propose that the obvious that human beings, like all other animals, do 2 things socially. They either are linking, being friends and palling up with each other, or they're ranking, they're deciding who's better. And we do both of them all the time. But what I noticed I got interested in this because I noticed that all my patients, although they wanted to be loved and linked and attached, in fact, they were tending to rank. They saw themselves as inferior, or some of them saw themselves as superior. One way or the other, it wasn't a very good way to feel love. Well, turns out that insecure attachment is really about power, if you think about it. The avoidant wants to stay in power and be one up over everybody else, like I'm in charge of when we're close and when we're not. And the insecure person, I didn't describe the insecure, did I? They're called anxious, preoccupied, and they're the ones who tend to be jealous and afraid that you don't love them enough, and they can be difficult to be with too. They're constantly checking on whether you care about them or not, constantly accusing you of not really caring about them. But so there's the narcissist that has this wound inside is doing the one-up thing, and the insecure, is one down, feels always one down, like you could leave me anytime, I have no power over you. I couldn't leave, it's you who could leave, so it's about ranking. So the thing with a narcissist is that it's very difficult to link with them on an equal level. But that's what you have to do now. The question was, would you please discuss how HSPs tend to interact and may attract narcissists? Well, I think that the fact that we tend to be attuned and empathic and caring is very attractive to everyone, but especially to someone who's very wounded. Plus, sensitive people often have special talents, and narcissists love to have people with special talents tied to them in some way. And so we can easily become sort of the priestly advisor to some warrior king narcissist. And it's not a pretty picture when that goes on. I should just say one thing, is that almost everybody in their lives will get caught in a relationship with a narcissist or with something more extreme like a sociopath, because if we go around not realizing that there are people like this until we get into relationships with it. Sometimes people marry them or, get into a work partnership with them. So everybody makes this mistake. A lot of people make this mistake. So don't feel too bad. It may be that HSPs are not anymore in relationships with narcissists. The non-HSPs, we may actually figure out and avoid it. It's just, it's painful when it happens, and probably sensitive people are more bothered by it. And how we tend to interact, I think we tend to willing to take that one down position, because most of us have felt most of our lives like there was something wrong with us. So it's pretty easy to manipulate us into feeling there's something wrong with us. You're so great, I'm so terrible. And that's what the narcissist would like. So definitely you're going to upset a lot of narcissists after you start thinking about yourself as having an advantage. All right, those are the only 3 questions that I had, but I think I now have more. Oh, wait, yeah, right. Okay, good. Okay. Oh, does high sensitivity have to do with the level of our soul energy as being more powerful? Oh, definitely. And we've done studies of this too. We have a number of studies on this, but we don't publish those. But come around later and I'll give you the real studies. I'm not going to answer that. Usually I go through and pick out the ones that I want, but I'm trying to be fair tonight. Are there degrees? I don't mean to put that. I'm sorry. I was not the right way to respond to that. I just don't know. Because I think that possibly yes, except because we pick up on we can be so easily damaged by the environment. Maybe we're more at the extremes. That might be more true of whatever that soul energy means to each of us, because we do have an idea of what that means. Are there degrees of being highly sensitive? Not much. You tend to either be it or not. But there are other traits that modify it. And I forgot to talk about high sensation seeking. That is sometimes we think that the highly sensitive person has something called a behavioral inhibition system that's more active. That doesn't mean that we inhibit our behavior. It now understands that it inhibits our behavior enough so that we can pause to check and observe and reflect more than other people do. Behavioral activation system makes us go for it. Now, some people have both. They have a very active inhibition system and a very active activation system. So it's like one foot on the gas and one foot on the brakes. And I should have explained this earlier, because a lot of sensitive people are like this, especially ones who come out to things. And it's quite a different feeling having this. And I just did say it a little bit about Janine Ramsey, because she calls this the sensationalist, and she's one. And lots of people in the media are, every time I'm interviewed by someone, they always turn out to be highly sensitive and high sensation seekers. Is it such a good combination? You have good intuition about what people are going to want to read. You're able to ask provocative, deep questions, but you're also interested in everything, and you want to interview a different person today than you did yesterday on a different subject. So, but we've actually, Franziska Boris in Germany, whom I just met and is a really nice person, did her graduate degree or did her dissertation on this very subject. There's a way to do a statistical analysis to find out whether something is a dimension or a category, and sensitivity is definitely a category and not a dimension. That doesn't mean that if we took all the scores on the HSP scale and put them in a scatter diagram, we wouldn't find them all along the thing. But that's because there are many things that cause people to say yes and no to those items besides their sensitivity. I mean, we know that people tend to say yes to this and no to that because they're sensitive, but there's other reasons why people might say yes and no to them. One thing we find is that even though every item on that self-test is one in which men do not answer any more less often than women. So like we didn't use cries easily because men didn't say yes to that as much. Yet, when we give this test to men and to women, men score lower on it. So all I can figure, and we're studying this now, is maybe what's happening is that as they go down the test, they start saying yes to fewer and fewer items because they're starting to get anxious because it's going to look like they're highly sensitive, which is quite worrisome to some people. But at any rate, we don't think that there are degrees, even though we do see that male-female difference. We don't see it in animals and we don't see it in children, but as people get older and they've gotten more worried about their sensitivity showing up and the problems in the culture, then you do get men scoring lower. Do HSPs make good actors? Yes, they do. And there's many, many, many actors. And, used to be you'd hear about comedians and actors who say, I'm really a very shy person. Well, this is what they're talking about. That's a great trait to have, to be able to act well. What might you suggest for HSPs trying to deal with social media, smartphones, and the constant demand to be available and responsive? And well, I'm not, so why should you be? I do not even have a smartphone. Yeah. And I thought it was like going to be seen as because I'm old, but it's not that. It's not that. It's that I just, for one thing, I don't have a very good neck, so maybe that's age. But I know that if I keep my head like this a lot, I'm going to not feel good. But it's more than that. I do not want to see my email all the time. I do not want to have all these apps. I would like that Google traffic one. So I call my husband and I say, tell me what the Google traffic thing says about this. And I need that one day a week to get out of San Francisco on Friday evenings. So, I don't have a Facebook page. I ignore LinkedIn requests. I don't tweet or Twitter or any of that because email is bad enough. It is so bad. When I look at my life before and after email, so, why do you need all these friends? I mean, one or two close friends is good enough. And then you see them once a year for dinner at their birthdays, You can hold people in your heart and not have to be in constant communication with them. I mean, it's not good for sensitive people. Somebody did a study. They thought when the internet came out that sensitive people would be on the internet more. Well, they were actually doing a study of introverts and extroverts. That introverts would be on the internet more because they wouldn't have to be face-to-face with people. But no, and we all know now that sensitive people and introverts are using that stuff less because it's to cut down on stimulation that we need. And we... it's made things much too easy. So I think it's good. It's like the canary in the mine thing. I think it's good to role model doing less of it. Now I've seen now that if you want to get a job, people want to see your Facebook page and your website and all this in order to see that you're really alive and kicking like the rest of everybody, like the other 80%. So that I can see could be a problem, but this comes into the whole problem of how you talk about your sensitivity to other people and how you talk about it in the workplace and all that. And I think if you get the right answers, then you can teach people something. And the right answer is different for different people. For a while I had a thing that said, I only answer my emails on 3 days a week. If you want to reach me, you can call this phone number. But I realized that was not that good. But I just don't answer my emails very often. I try not to do it every day. I try to take 3 or 4 days off and put an out-of-office reply on. I just think it's a curse, really, for sensitive people. So think it's okay to fight it in whatever way works for you. Well, this is a passionate one. How can the HSP reconcile himself, we notice, to the oppression of living in an extroverted-oriented culture? Where is the good life available for an HSP? Am I in the wrong country or on the wrong planet? Oh, I feel for this person, of course. It's almost a wail of despair. It's not really meant to have an answer, but to know that many, many people in this room wonder about these same things. Like I said, if there are people who can say yes and people can say no to every item on the self-test, you definitely can feel like you're in the wrong country or on the wrong planet, and that is really hard. It's really hard. And I think this person is identifying himself probably as a man, and I think it's so much harder for men to be among non-sensitive men, and it's just really difficult. And I just can only express sympathy. And, well, I could also say, if you're up to it, you might go to an HSP gathering, because Jacqueline Strickland, she's an extrovert, and some people think, is she highly sensitive? But she's done 27 of these, and I don't know many people who would do that who is highly sensitive. She is highly sensitive, but she's gotten really good at this. And she can really, in a weekend, make a person feel a lot better about being sensitive. So that's something that a person could do. And then what you do is you begin to have friends. At the two women who were here, they met in an HSP gathering, and another friend was here too. She had me take her. They wanted a picture taken. The woman who wanted the picture of me and her goes back and forth to Dominican Republic and speaks about sensitivity there in Spanish. It's really neat. So anyway, meeting other sensitive people is probably one of the very best things that you can do. How do you release painful memories as an HSP? There are a number of these kind of questions that go into this side of things. And it's not so different for non-sensitive people in terms of what you have to do in therapy, and there's no single understanding or theory of how to do this. Somebody asked, what about meditation and techniques to regulate your nervous system, like meditation, biofeedback, and EFT tapping. And lots of people, I'm a big fan of TM myself, which I've been doing for 42 years, almost without fail, twice a day. Tonight was a fail so far. But meditation is good, biofeedback can be good, EFT tapping, good. It just depends on what works for you. And I wish I could be more helpful on these things, but it's so individual. Even though there's this sensitive versus non-sensitive thing, every person is so unique. You look around, everyone is different. Their thumbnails are different, their brains are different, their experiences are different. So what you need, if possible, is a therapist who's really good, of which there are not that many, I will admit, and then that person figures out what works for you. It's not to be so much method-driven as someone who has a variety of methods and figures out what works best for you. And often being listened to is the very best healing thing that can happen. And somebody asked, what do you do if you can't go to therapy? And I'll say that I wrote The Undervalued Self, in order to give away everything I knew about psychotherapy. There's a copy of the book right there. And it really does try to lay out a program that takes years, because there's steps to it, but you don't have to, you can go through it, and the steps you just keep. But it's basically goes with the idea that we all feel better when we're linking than when we're ranking. And if you can just do that, great, you're done reading the book. But if you can't, then we go into the reasons why you can't. And I think all therapy does take place in a relationship, but it's not required that you be with a psychotherapist to heal. If two people were to read The Undervalued Self together and work with it, they could easily help each other a lot. There used to be, and I don't hear much about it, some kind of peer counseling program where people used to learn how to do therapy with each other, just listening, just reflective listening. And people got so much from it. So create your own therapist out of your best friend. Or it's possible. You do it for each other. Did you accept your sensitivity right away, or did it take time? I found out 4 years ago and just now I'm able to receive the joy. Yeah, it took time. It took time. It took writing the book, and my husband and I had not a big fight, but quite a disagreement when I wrote Chapter 7 in The Highly Sensitive Person about close relationships. And what I wrote was, you're really fortunate if you're in a relationship with a non-sensitive person, because that person can help you and make you feel better and do all the things that you can't do and blah, blah, blah. And he said, what? He said, that's true, but you don't get at all what I get from being in the relationship with you. And so that was a wonderful experience to hear that from him. And I've got it now. I see it, but I didn't see it when I was writing the book. What is the correlation between being in HSP and depression and anxiety? And I'm saying it's what we call an interaction, a statistical interaction. If you have had a stressful life, especially in childhood, you are more likely than other people to be depressed and anxious. If you have not, you are less likely than other people to be depressed and anxious. So there's no correlation per se, it's this interaction. So it's a different kind of statistic. So it's not a correlation, it's an interaction. And so that's how it is, and that's the answer to that question. How does one tell the difference between their own energy or feelings versus someone else's? For example, how do you know where it's coming from? Well, that's a good question. I think of that mirror neuron thing, and maybe some people's mirror neurons are not saying, wait, that's you and not them, or that's them and not you. Maybe that's really seriously a problem for some sensitive people if their mirror neurons are more active. I don't have as much of this problem as most people do, and I'm not sure what that is. How does one tell the difference between their own energy or feelings? I guess one thing as a psychologist, you learn about projection, and you learn to be suspicious when you think you know what someone else is feeling. You have to check and say, well, could that be what I'm feeling, and I'm projecting that onto them. So sorting out, that's what a therapist has to learn to do, is to sort out how, is this me or is this the other person that's creating this feeling in me? So I suppose it's practice and questioning all the time, like, what could be going on here, using a little depth of processing to try to sort it out. And this is similar about this speaking the unspoken, what to do. I'm so sensitive to picking up others' energies that something is going on. I feel an enormous need to state it openly and feel uncomfortable about it, but later others tell me they were so relieved that I said it. Well, so that's good. Sometimes people are not relieved, and then you use your sensitivity to know, to discern what's going to likely be the case. I think a big problem in groups for sensitive people, especially at work, is that we hear an idea and maybe we could shoot it down right away. This is not going to work. Or we have a better idea. We have 10 ideas and nobody else has any ideas. But do you display all this and have people be jealous or upset or feel you're a pessimist or something? Or do you hide it? And if you hide it, you feel alienated from the group. And if you speak up, you risk various things. And it's one reason why it's important for people to a group of people working together to understand these different traits, so that they turn to the sensitive person and say, what do you think about this? And then say, well, if you want to know, this is what I think. Otherwise, you just have to feel it out. Can't say more than that. Does inattentive mother qualify as a troubled child? Definitely. How do you know what part of high something are what you lack for? Okay, I've answered one question of 3 on that card, so I think it'd only be fair for me to stop there. HSP seems to have a number of things in common with Asperger's syndrome, the difficulty in social relationships. Okay, this is an important question because people are asking this all the time, and it's very important to realize that they are very, very different. There's one thing that's similar, and that is that people on the autistic spectrum, which is what they call it now, are easily overstimulated. Why? Because what we think is that they have a hard time discerning what's important and what's not. So, and particularly socially, so the expression on your face and your face is interesting, but so is that lamp, and so is what's the sign up there that says exit, and you know, it's all kind of equal. And they're trying to process it all. They don't have that ability to prioritize. So they're getting overstimulated, but it's different. The sensitive person is getting overstimulated from too much processing. So it's a really different feel inside, and to some, it certainly must look different in an MRI. And the other thing is that sensitive people are exquisitely sensitive to social stuff. And the autistic spectrum, that's the main problem, is the difficulty. There's a difficulty in social relationships where you can't read what other people are doing and you just feel really out of sync with them for that reason. It's quite different from the difficulties that sensitive people have. And I imagine you've gotten a sense of that by now, how they're different. Is there a correlation between sensitivity and migraines? I suspect there is, but I don't know of any research on that. I suspect there is. Does trauma make a sensitive person out of an otherwise hardy person? No. PTSD can make you hypervigilant and startle easily, and have some things that look like sensitivity, but it's in the area of the trauma. It's not broad, and it's not the kind of processing when one is calm and reflective. That doesn't go with trauma per se. Sensitive people can have both, of course. I counsel men who are highly sensitive, and they do tell me they don't want to know this. I hope that this whole evening will help this person with this. It's a tough one, isn't it? But sounds like this person has already told them. So self-knowledge is valuable, even when it's not knowledge that you're delighted with. I think this evening surely has helped with that question. Has your public speaking helped you overcome the negative traits of sensitivity? And if you had them, in other words, has it made you hardier? Does anything make HSPs hard? Oh, I think public speaking has definitely made me hardier. I just absolutely, I mean, when I was in junior high, the worst thing that could have happened to me, and it did happen to me, was have to give a talk or a speech. It's horrible, and it is, practice just improves it. And talking to sensitive people is a big difference. I get pretty nervous in front of non-sensitive people. It makes a big difference. And I'm always talking about something that I really know a lot about. And so the best way to get hardier in these kind of situations is just to be super, super prepared and knowledgeable until all you're thinking about is giving people the information and not thinking about yourself. Although I do still think about this. Oh, we fixed it already. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Chicken or the egg? There is anxiety, depression with most HSPs, and there is medication for them. But more than that, or separate altogether, is the ability to feel. For those who feel so intensely that it alters decisions and behavior, is there a medication for that to help? Well, I really think that things like adjusting your lifestyle, meditating, developing a philosophy of life that helps you to be calm, like, you know, some people really get a lot from Buddhism for that reason. Taoism, things that help to, I mean, those are really important. Not that I'm against medication, but it's a hard street to go down because they're hard to get off of, for one thing, and we don't know all of their effects on the body. If a person is depressed to the point of feeling suicidal, there's no doubt that they should consider medication, because it saves lives right and left. I've seen it lots of times in my own practice. But don't let people push it onto you because of your sensitivity, and don't go that direction if changing your lifestyle would make the difference. Okay, a little bit on careers. What are good professions for HSPs? And as I find myself searching for a new career. Can you speak on career areas which are better for, especially mid-career? Currently a project manager. Well, I think sensitive people can do anything if they do it their way. But we also have to have meaningful work. We are not happy when something is not meaningful. And what often happens, Barry Yeager wrote a book called Making Work Work for the Sensitive Person. Unfortunately, her main advice was, if you don't like your work, you should change jobs, which is the only advice I would be able to give either, so that's why I haven't written a book on work. But it's obviously not practical for a lot of people. But she makes a distinction between drudgery, craft, and calling, and I really like this distinction because sensitive people just probably get very depressed and anxious in a drudgery job. They can't do it for long. And some people can because they're just earning money to, do the things they want to do. But sensitive people can't last long in a drudgery job. A craft job is one in which you're very good at what you do. And sensitive people can enjoy that up to a point. Once you've mastered your craft, then it can become drudgery. And this is much more of a problem for high sensation seekers who need variety in their lives. So you have to find your, quote, calling, which is a very romantic idea. 200 years ago, nobody had a calling. It's very romantic. It's like you fall in love with your job. But it's true that if you love what you do, it's a blessing. Just like if you love your partner, it's a blessing. So it's really worth trying to find your calling. And then how do you support yourself doing that? Well, one thing that I've written and like this saying, because I think it's so true, is you'll support yourself happily where your own greatest bliss intersects the world's greatest need. And a creative person, a sensitive person being creative, can look around, see a need that's not being met, and fill it. I'm sure the first dog walker was a highly sensitive person. I mean, and there's so many interesting things that people still need, I think, done. I keep thinking that somebody, and maybe somebody does it, but I don't know of anyone who does it, should not volunteer, but be paid to study any illness that a person has gotten who's very busy and wants to know the best treatment. So you come down with Lyme disease. Hire somebody, and this is a sensitive person with a very objective, discerning, will present you, with the research and the arguments pro and con. And if you're really busy, be a big help to have somebody. My husband did this for somebody with breast cancer. Should she or should she not follow up the radiation with chemotherapy? What did the research say? My husband did a whole review of the literature and gave her what is known at this point. It's the answer to that for the kind of cancer she had. I'm sure it's all changed, but that's, there's so many places where people are frustrated and need help, and sensitive people can do it. And I think sensitive people do really well in self-employment. It's hard, but all the politics of the workplace are gone. You have your own schedule. So what's hard, of course, is being able to support yourself at it. But in terms of good professions for sensitive people, traditionally we were the doctors, the lawyers, the teachers, the artists, the historians, the scientists, and sensitive people have kind of been pushed out of those a lot, but those are anything that reflecting on something improves it is a good place for a sensitive person if you can find your right way of doing that. A lot of sensitive people, I joke, have all become massage therapists or gone into alternative medicine in some way. And I think it's true that sensitive people are very good with bodies. They're very good with animals. They're very good with babies. They're very good with elderly people who've reached the point where they can't communicate that well because we're able to pick up on all these nonverbal cues. So, I mean, the main thing is to find something that you love and something that will make use of your ability to process things deeply, avoid your getting overstimulated, make use of your emotional empathy, your emotional responsiveness, and your ability to notice subtle stimuli. Okay, romantic relationships. So we can do this in 5 minutes. I wrote The Highly Sensitive Person in Love for this. Can two HSPs have a successful romantic relationship? If so, how? Without overreacting to things, etc. Well, you can always live in separate houses. I mean, it's overreacting to things, yeah. I guess a lot of forgiveness helps, because I find that for myself, when I'm tired, the whole thing is understanding the tiredness, that and complexes. So tiredness, just, sensitive person, when we're tired, we're not nice anymore. We've really gotten that down in our relationship. I say, don't say a word to me, just get me to bed. Just don't say a word. And that has really helped a lot. So, and the other thing which I wrote about in the Undervalued Self quite a bit is about complexes. And complexes are areas in our life where we become totally irrational. And they're usually around some trauma, and then it gets all this stuff gets defenses and feelings and thoughts. So for instance, jealousy, like a person's been betrayed once, and then they have a whole complex about jealousy. And that's a whole thing that happens in any relationship, but I don't think it's easy to have a good relationship without understanding about complexes. In fact, I don't think it's easy to have a successful romantic relationship without knowing quite a bit of psychology about how attachment affects your relationship, how projection affects it, how self-defenses and manifest themselves in blaming the other person and all that. It's just, I don't know how people do it. What do you suggest to HSPs who are going through heartbreak? Well, that's a really difficult one. Everyone knows that time is the main thing with heartbreak. The other thing I say, and I hate these glib answers, but I have to get glib here, is that attachment is different from love. We're attached to people if we've spent time with them a lot, if we've lived together with them, if they've ever done anything nice to us, we treat them kind of like a caregiver. But love, in the Undervalued Self, I define love very specifically, and a lot of people find out that people who, quote, love them don't really love them. Love, I think, is when you are attracted to the other person in some way. I want to be around you. I want to know a lot about you. I want to know what your day was like. I want to know what you're thinking. I want to know all about you. And I want to help you as much as I can. Now, people are not, with people, lots of parents say I love you, and they don't want to be around the kid, and they don't want to know anything about him, and they don't want to help him very much. They'd like to hire someone else to help them. That's not love. But, so in a relationship, you can fall in love with somebody and fall in love and meet each other's needs for a while and be used to being together and also feel crummy about yourself if they leave you, which is a whole other issue. But that's not love, and so you just have to say, I got to wait through my husband and I, we did this kind of together. I have this theory about love as the motivation of life is to expand, and close relationships are a way that we expand, and we come to include the other person in ourselves, so we treat the other person as if they are ourselves. And there's actually studies, cognitive studies, that show the brain does this, that we confuse the other person the closer we are to them. But then when you go to separate, it's like disentangling this overlapping self. And that it's like there must be certainly neurons that are just going, ow, ow, ooh, that's being ripped out. And all you can do is be patient and do all the things you do for physical pain. Distraction is a good one, one of the best for physical pain and psychological pain. there was a study, not done by us, but a study in which they made people feel terrible about themselves while they were in the fMRI thing. You know, they told them that they had worked with these people on a task, and then while they're in the machine, they tell them, actually, these people didn't like you very well, and they don't want you to work on the task anymore with them. Then they tell them later that this was just an experiment. But people's brains register in the same area as physical pain. So when we say heartbreak, we literally have the physical pain of the heart breaking. And so all these analogies, these metaphors are not even metaphors to the brain. It hurts. Why did you hurt my feelings? So you have to appreciate that it is going to be painful, and since sensitive people feel things more than other people, this is where we all have to become more and more skilled, and often it's through a variety of ways of learning to regulate our emotions. And infants are helped by their parents to regulate emotions. And we literally read from our parents how to respond to things. And like there's a famous visual cliff thing where there's a glass and there's the baby's crawling and looks down, and even though it's glass, clearly there's a big drop. And the baby looks to the mother who's on the other side of this thing to see whether or not it's safe to cross. You know, we're getting all of our cues from our parents. So if we didn't get good affect regulation, if our parents couldn't control their emotions, then it's harder for us. But somewhere along the line, we need to learn how to calm ourselves down, and then that helps with heartbreaks too. Pros and cons of being an HSP versus non-HSP versus two HSPs. That's all in the highly sensitive person in love. What advice do you have for the dating courtship process for HSPs? That's also in the highly sensitive person in love. Okay, 9 o'clock. We become pumpkins. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.